right, welcome back, and now we're going to pass it over to Dale Aubert, who's going to take us through the Maya side of our 3D implementation this hour. So Daryl, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Sean. So we're actually going to be showing Maya in conjunction with Smoke, both running on OS 10. And basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to do sort of a broadcast sports opening piece and using Maya to kind of highlight some of the advanced character animation tools that we have, as well as try to illustrate really the power and flexibility of Maya's various effects systems, and then take all those end results and finish those off inside of Smoke on the Mac. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hop into Smoke really quickly and play back where I ended up, and then we'll kind of go to the beginning and show you where the project starts. So what I've got here is, like I said, just this kind of simple little piece that I put together of some objects that I got off of TurboSquid. So I went ahead and TurboSquid has this great library of geometry as well as motion capture moves. And Maya has these really amazing extensible tools for dealing with retargeting motion capture. So that's sort of where the project started, was browsing on the internet, trying to find some assets to begin working with, and then basically render them out, bring them into Smoke, and give them this kind of final, finished, polished look. So let's go ahead and just escape out of this really quickly, and we'll talk about where I started. So essentially what happens is, when I'm going and I'm thinking about doing a job, you know, if it's motion capture moves, I know that there's going to be some really nice moves out there. And one of the things that's kind of cool about most motion capture takes is a lot of chances are going to be stored in the FBX file format, which happens to be something that QuickTime can open if you load the FBX plug into it. So if we just look at this really quickly, you can see that that's the move that I found on TurboSquid that I wanted to use. So that's really where the project started, was I've got this motion capture move. I know I want to do a couple of cuts on this guy. What am I going to do to kind of convey the sense of this, what this shot or this story is going to be like? So the first thing that I did was go ahead and draw some boards for that. So once I get those boards drawn, what I wanted to do is just hop into Smoke and begin sort of putting together an edit for how those boards are going to kind of come together. So I've got a few cuts here, and if we just kind of jump through these, you can see I just drew a couple boards. So I've got a few boards for the first shot, a couple boards for the second shot, and a couple boards for the third shot. And if we're just jumping through this, you know, we get a sense of the movement kind of, but we're not sure where the camera cuts are and where, you know, the animation is. So to kind of illustrate that a little bit more clearly in my storyboard, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add some simple cross dissolves between these effects here, between these clips. So we'll just bring up our dissolve, we'll add it to all those clips, and I'll just make a delete on the dissolve where I'm cutting between my different shots. So now what we have is obviously just a really simple little animation, or a storyboard, I should say, that kind of does these cross dissolves. It illustrates the movement and then the camera cuts very clearly. So what we want to do is we want to get this information into Maya to begin laying out 3D. And between Maya and Smoke, there's several different ways we can pass information back and forth. For this example, what I did is I basically just exported out an editorial. What that means is it's just an EDL file. So I saved it out as an AAF file. So I said not import, but export. Exported that out, and it renders out a QuickTime movie for me. And Maya has the ability to import in Final Cut Pro XMLs as well as AAC files to begin laying stuff out. So it's going to bring in the QuickTime movie for me as well as a camera. So we'll be looking at that a little bit further on down the pipeline here once we start to do layout. So now that I got my story kind of set, I've done my boards, I know where I need to go, we're going to hop into Maya and start looking at some of the really cool tools that Maya brings to the table, specifically for doing character animation and sort of that smoky kind of cloud effect, these visual effects. And these are two of the things that Maya totally excels at. So let's just go ahead and pull up Maya really quickly. We'll hide Smoke, and we'll pop into Maya. So over the last few releases inside of Maya, we've really been working hard on improving our visual fidelity in our viewport, as well as its performance. And we're going to look at an example of that right now. So this is really what the standard viewport inside of Maya looked like for about the first 10 years of its existence. This was the original viewport technology, just simple OpenGL. Over the last few releases, we've been working on something called Viewport 2.0 with two main goals: increase performance substantially, as well as increase visual fidelity. So make it look really pretty and make it go really fast. And this is something that Maya is really amazing at. It's probably the fastest viewport in the industry, as well as one of the best looking. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and turn on Viewport 2.0. As soon as we enable Viewport 2.0 and get out of that legacy viewport, you're going to see that it's going to look a little bit better. It should take just a second to pop up. So now that turned on, we're going to go ahead and start to turn on some of the kind of cool bells and whistles on that guy. So right now, it doesn't really have any shadows, so we'll just turn on hardware shadows. This is, again, something that Viewport 2.0 can excel at. Depth mapped, kind of soft, nice shadows, as well as ambient occlusion. So what ambient occlusion does is it goes through and it tries to find the areas that light can't reach, areas that are occluded from the ambient light, and it makes them dark. This gives us that kind of nice grounding patch underneath that ball, as well as kind of all the cracks in the robot sort of getting filled in. So you can start to see this visual fidelity coming into play here. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn on hardware anti-aliasing. So this is going to take all those jaggy edges and kind of soften those guys out for us. The next thing that we're going to do is we'll just turn on depth of field. So if we go ahead and just grab our camera, we're going to have to adjust that focal point. So we'll just select that camera and jump into the attribute editor. So this is sort of an object editor that allows us to change attributes on any object. So we'll just push that focal distance out to something like, I don't know, 100. And then we can kind of zoom in on that ball and get that ball within that focal distance. And you'll see that we have that background character sort of still out of focus, hanging out there in the background with that depth of field turned on. So these are a couple things that Viewport 2.0 does really, really well. The next thing that we want to talk about really quickly is the ability for us to efficiently handle extremely large data sets using the scene assembly tools that are included inside of Maya 2014. So what scene assembly allows us to do is it allows us to have multiple representations of a given piece of geometry. So this is very useful for doing things like working with massively large data sets, as well as just doing simple versioning. You know, you've got 4 or 5 different versions of a character. The ability to switch in between and toggle between those different versions very quickly is another sort of bonus that scene assembly tools brings to the table. So what I want to do is just bring in a version of this robot using that scene assembly tool. So we'll just go and say, create a scene assembly reference. Let's deselect that guy to do that first. So with the assembly reference, I'm going to be loading up a file that basically has placeholders that point out to multiple representations of this piece of geometry. So when I load it up the first time, what we have here is, let's go ahead and here, I just hit W. I didn't mean to do that. Let's translate that guy across there. What we have is a simple locator that's representing this geometry. This scene assembly is at its lowest level when we're looking at the locator. If we double click on this and bring up the attribute editor, you can see that I have multiple representations in here. So I have a low-res version that I might animate on, a kind of a boxed version of the character. That low-res version, if we expand this out, you'll see it has a pretty substantial hierarchy of bones and geometry associated with that. We've got a render version of this that's kind of the blue guy, as well as a alternate version that's the red guy. And then we have finally, which is something that's really, really cool, this GPU cached version. So this is a cached out version of the animation of my character, and I don't know where he lives. There he is, he's over there. So the GPU caches are something that's kind of interesting because this uses the Alembic file format, which is a kind of open source file format that's ridiculously fast at loading and playing back. So you can load up massive scenes very, very quickly when they're represented by these GPU-based Alembic caches. So let's go ahead and jump back down to that box version of our character. Let's just switch over to that guy. And what we want to do is we want to start setting up a simple constraint on this. So we're going to go ahead and grab our ball here that we want to have the object always looking at, the character always looking at, grab his head, and I'm going to create a constraint. So we'll jump over to our animation tools, and I'm going to create a aim constraint. So what that means is when I move the ball around, the head is always going to try to look at the ball. So this is pretty cool, right? We've actually have the ability to interact with objects that are referenced in Union scene assemblies. And it's a very robust system in the ability to handle kind of fostered children. Like if I load this guy out and go to a version of this character that doesn't have the same nodes, that constraint doesn't just get deleted. It actually just hangs out waiting for something to come back in that makes sense. So let's just look at a quick example of that. We'll jump back to our little guy right here. We'll grab our locator version of our character. We'll slide him over here. And then we'll load in the blue version of the character. So the blue version has a node that's the same node as the kind of low-res geometry animation version, so that constraint comes through and basically just works. So this is one of the great things about scene assembly tools is it's very robust in its implementation. So let's go ahead and get rid of all that stuff. We don't really need to have that scene assembly tool in there anymore. We'll just delete that guy out. We'll move on here and talk about the ability for us to retarget animation inside of Maya. So Maya's retargeting tools are super cool. They're based on Human IK, which is technology that came from Motion Builder. It's actually the exact same technology that's inside of Motion Builder. And Human IK allows us a very flexible rig that will really facilitate the retargeting process in an extremely high-level manner. So let's go ahead and look at how we set this up. The first thing you need to do when working with Human IK is teach your character or your hierarchy about the solver, or teach the solver about the hierarchy of your skeleton. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to our first character here, We'll switch over to a version of this guy that's got some bones inside of him or some joints inside of him. So all we have to do is populate this little character controls window with the corresponding bones in the viewport. So it's just a simple matching operation. Double click on the bone, swipe it in the viewport. So to kind of accelerate this, I'm just going to use a naming template that I previously saved out so you can reuse. Oops, I don't have a naming template because I switched computers last night. So we're going to populate this manually, and I won't accelerate it using the naming template, but it's okay because all you have to do is match these 12 bones. So once these 12 bones that you see in this viewport are matched, the retargeter has enough information to work. If you match more bones, it'll actually go ahead and use those. So if you wanted to have extra spine joints or extra neck joints, it would basically work. But all you really need is 12 bones, basically one spine, one head. We'll hop in here and we'll just populate in these other spines. Looks like they're already filled in. That's good. So that's all you have to do to get this guy set up and ready to work. And once that's done, we can lock him off. And we can go ahead and create a control rig. So what the control rig is this is really kind of where the magic happens. This is it's a system that allows you to pose and animate your character using both inverse kinematics, meaning you can grab an end effector and move it, and the computer inversely calculates those joint rotations to solve for that world position. Or you can use forward kinematics, which means you just grab a bone, you go into your rotation tool, and you rotate it, right? So when we're retargeting, sometimes you want to match joint angle. It's really important. Other times you want to match in position or world position. The ability for this rig to work with both FK and IK facilitates that. The other thing that it does that's really amazing is it's a full body inverse kinematics solver. So what does that mean? Well, basically, if I grab an arm and I'm in body part mode, this is like a traditional IK chain that stops at that, oops, I'm in body part mode now. You get a visual representation in your character controls window showing you what bones can be influenced by my current selection and what bones will get keyed. So when I'm in body part mode, it stops at the shoulder, right? So if we go ahead and we overextend that arm, what happens is it doesn't have the ability to transfer that energy all the way through the hierarchy of the skeleton. If we go into full body mode and we begin to pull that arm, you can see that it has the ability to transfer that and pose the skeleton realistically. So the reason this is really important when dealing with retargeting is if I'm matching world position to go up and reach something and I have a little tiny character, I want that arm to not just stop, but reach and kind of transfer that energy realistically through the whole hierarchy to get to that world position when we're doing the retargeting operation. Because almost always you're going to be dealing with differences in size and scale with characters and mocap. So having this human IK solver is sort of the foundation underneath all of that makes it really, really realistic in the end result. So what we're going to do now is just go ahead and look at another piece of geometry that we have in our scene here, or that motion capture FBX file I already imported in here. So we've got the soccer move of our guy kind of hanging out over here. So if we scrub through this, what we want to do now is instead of having our robot that's bound into that skeleton being dragged around by this control rig, what we want to do is we want to have that robot get controlled by that motion capture move. So this is just a simple process of changing the source. So as soon as we do that, just like that, we now have motion capture that's lined up, taking that move, applying it to our robot. So that's the basics of dealing with motion capture inside of Maya. Same technology that's in Motion Builder directly in Maya. So if you're trying to do anything that's broadcast sports related, I can guarantee you there's going to be a ton of motion capture out there relatively cost effectively on TurboSquid or other resources on the internet that let you just immediately get realistic looking moves into the system very, very quickly. So the next thing that we want to talk about is that camera sequencer. We'll go ahead and we'll hide the display of our joints. So camera sequencer is Maya's non-linear editor, and it has the ability to import in EDL files. So we had that storyboard that we laid out inside of Smoke on the Mac previously. We want to import that in and begin to use that as our starting point to start doing our layout of our shots or our cameras. So let's go ahead and import in the EDL. We'll just say import editorial, jump out to my desktop, we'll grab this storyboard AAF file, we'll open that guy up, and now what I have is I've got a timeline in my camera sequencer that's got a QuickTime movie associated with it, and what we want to do is we want to begin finding those areas that are those cuts and start laying this out. So we're going to just drop the transparency on that image plane. We'll kind of start framing this camera up here that's attached to this guy and try to match out or lay out our shot. So our shot one's kind of this close-up on the feet, something sort of like that. I like the way that looks. That's pretty cool. So we'll move forward in time to where that cut's going to kind of happen. So right there, I know that's where my cut's going to happen. I need to jump to another camera. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here and we're going to say, you know what? I want to lock this camera down where my currently, I want to have a camera that captures this view. So this is new in 2014, create camera from view. Any new operation in Maya 2014 has been highlighted for me. You can turn this off if you don't like it, but when you pull it up and you're using it, if you're an old Maya user, it's kind of nice to get that visual cue as, hey, we got a new feature right here. Let's see what that does. So we'll go ahead and we'll create that camera from there. And at the same time, I'm going to go and I'm just going to say, you know what? Let's just split this clip. So I'm going to just use the simple split tool. So now if we scrub back in time here, I'm going to say this first shot is going to be that new camera that we just made. So we've got our first shot. We jump to our second clip. It jumps back to that camera there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and highlight or change that image plane transparency down so that we can see through our geometry. We're going to come over here and do something sort of like this. Line that guy up relatively close. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to select this camera, and I'm actually going to set a keyframe on it. So we'll just hit S. We'll keyframe that camera. We'll move forward in time. So there goes my soccer ball. Right around here, there's going to be another cut. There's my other cut. So right around this range, I know I need to do another edit. We'll kind of do something like this and capture the look and feel of what we had in that guy. My camera's still selected, so I'm going to hit my S key one more time. So we now have this little camera move happening here, right? As my guy sort of does that kick, we get that little camera move. I might want to do something like that and drop it down ever so slightly and set another keyframe in there. So we've animated that camera. We're going to come over here and we're going to do one more cut. So let's go ahead and say, we'll create a camera from this point of view. So we're going to use that same select camera. So create camera from view. We'll do another cut on this guy. Pretty straightforward, right? So we'll just go to the split tool. We'll go ahead and we'll jump back here. So this shot, we want to make sure is that camera one, actually. That's the animated camera, right? So we've got our first shot, our second shot, and then we've got to, kind of work on our third shot right here. So let's go ahead and just position this camera. Actually, let's position it with this one. And that was sort of a tight shot. So that's really the basics. We got 3 camera shots. We did a little bit of camera animation on that guy. Now, if I wanted to send this sort of more refined version, we had storyboards. Let's say I want to pass this back up to editorial so that they can start adding some graphical treatment, some of those lens flares, those glows, and then send it off to the client as an animatic. I could send all this information back up to Smoke using EDLs. So I could say export editorial. It'll render out QuickTime movies or Play Blast, all of these using that high-quality Viewport 2.0 display. And we could even do something like in Viewport 2.0, turn on motion blur, right? Like, check this out. We get motion blur turned on in there. It's going to look really, really cool. Actually, let's go ahead and turn on motion blur. And we'll jump out to one of these camera shots, something like camera shot 2. So with all that, we could basically send this out with that motion blur, all those cool shadows, all that kind of ambient occlusion stuff happening into Smoke on the Mac, send it off to the client, get their approval, move on to the next phase, which is creating the effects. And this is something that, again, that Maya is extremely efficient at, is doing really cool effects work. So let's go ahead and just let's clean up our scene a little bit. We'll jump back here, and I'm not going to have my motion blur turned on. That's a little crazy. Let's turn that off. We'll turn that off. We'll turn that off. And I'm going to switch my mocap guy to none, get him back to the beginning there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just start making a fluid simulation. So we'll jump to our perspective view here. So actually, let's not have that gate displayed. I don't really like that gate. We'll hide that guy. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the way I wanted to do the fluid effect was using Maya fluids. When you're approaching doing an effect shot inside of Maya, we have a variety of tools that we can choose from. And a lot of them will be able to get you to very similar results. Particle systems and fluids can do similar things. For this shot, I wanted to use the fluid system because it's just so fast to start getting super cool results with. So let's go ahead and check that out and see what that means. Let's first hide my my mocap guy. We don't need to see that guy. We'll go and we'll create this fluid shape. So the way the fluid system works is it's just a container, and inside of that container is basically a voxelized space. So what we're representing inside of this container is density. And by default, it's going to have an emitter associated with it. So if we just increase our range slider out to something like a really large number, and we hit playback on this, what happens is there's an emitter in the center. It's spitting out density. That density starts to fill up this container. There's attributes you can adjust on the actual fluid shape to sort of control whether or not that density is going to continue to fill it up or it's going to have some dispersion. Right now it's set up that it has a little bit of dispersion. Let's go ahead and just turn that dispersion off so that you can see this container actually can get completely filled up. So if we go into our dynamic simulation, we go into our contents details, density, and turn off the dispersion, you'll see that that's going to now start to fill up. So imagine a smoke machine pumping smoke into a box, and it never really disperses. I've got a lot of buoyancy, negative buoyancy put on there. If I put that to 0, it'll start to rise up. Or if I put it to a positive value while it's playing back, you can see that it's all going to start to rise up. So really cool effects very, very quickly inside of the smoke node inside of Maya. So let's go ahead and get that back to those original settings that we had, -4, and letting the gas kind of die off or disperse a little bit. And what I want to do is I wanted to have the fluid sort of be at the bottom of the container when the animation started. So the way I'm going to do that, or the way I approached that, was I went ahead and I essentially emitted from a piece of geometry. So I can make a polygon object in my scene here. We'll sort of scale this guy up really quickly. We're going to make this into a big emitter. The 2014 release of Maya has the ability to emit from a piece of geometry, and now it can fill the piece of geometry, which is really cool. So instead of just emitting from the actual surface, it'll go through and fill the actual volume of that, which is what we're going to use in this example. So we've got this piece of geometry that we want to emit from. We'll select our fluid shape, pretty straightforward, and we're going to say dynamics. So we'll show our dynamics menus. Emit, let's go ahead and jump up to that. Emit from object. So we'll say fluid shape, edit contents, emit from object. So if we do that, I'm going to change this to fill the object, which is new in 2014. And I'm also going to say start frame and all frames. And these options are actually also new in 2014. That allows you to basically have the fluid sim not have to do a run-up to be already full. At frame 1, it's going to be completely full based on the density values that I already had set. So what we're going to do is we're going to hide that. We don't really need to see that box. We're going to jump back here. Let's put our range slider to 1 and 1. That's a little bit better. Put that guy to 1. And we'll start our interactive playback. So here comes our fluid being filled up based on that shape. We want to interact with it with this little soccer ball, right? Let's go ahead and let's add that in as a object that can influence it. I'm going to drop that P cube down a little bit. I want it to be a little bit lower there. So to add this in as a force or a field, you just simply select the fluid, select the object that you want to have affect it. So we'll grab the ball, the fluid shape, and we'll create a force from that. So now what I can do is I can go in here and I can start interactively manipulating that or passing that ball through. So what I do is I like to prototype this stuff sort of with these lower res voxelized spaces. When it comes time to render, I'm going to crank the quality up. So you can do some really cool stuff with the fluid. You can have any of the information in that fluid be queried and use that to modify the look or feel of it. So right now our shading's pretty simple, right? We've got density that kind of goes from a gradient. So where it's not very dense, it's white. Where it is dense, it's black. Right now, we're not really doing anything with incandescence. So I'm going to have that incandescence be tied to speed. And I'm going to bias it more toward the left by just moving this to the left here so that it's only going to kick on that incandescence where it goes very, very quickly. And you can see that we can manipulate the overall shape or effect of that density using these simple ramp modifiers. And the end result that you get, it's really pretty impressive. I'm always kind of shocked at how cool you can make these fluids look, how quickly you can get awesome effects using these guys. Like if we pull this forward a little bit here, and we kind of go up here and boom, just pop stuff up, move it around, swirl it around. It's just very, very cool. We got these kind of little self-shadowing things happening inside of that fluid shape. So that's essentially what I did for that shot. Very, very fast and easy to set up and do. So the next thing that we want to talk about really quickly is another really cool thing that Maya can do for sort of broadcast effects, and that's using our cloth solver to do some fun things with text. So let's go ahead and check out an example of that. We'll jump over to camera 3. We'll pull up our channel box to display this logo here. Come on. So what I've got is I've got some geometry on here. If we go back to frame, I don't know, we'll go out to maybe 300 frames here. So we can turn our character back on too. That'll be kind of cool. Let's get him back in there doing that mocap kick. So we've got our character kind of coming up here, doing his thing. And what we want to do is we want to have this logo become cloth and sort of drop down. So we'll take it, we'll build some geometry from it. I'm going to increase the resolution of that. This started off as an Illustrator file. They just come in as AI, as curves, and we'll put that up to something like 1200. I've already got a nucleus node in my environment. So this is Maya's unified dynamic simulation framework. So what that means is cloth can interact with particles, particles can interact with hair. They're all connected. They're all using the same framework. Again, it just lets you do really cool effects that sort of tie off of each other. So for this guy, what we're going to do is we're going to create a simple cloth object. I've got my scene set up so that it doesn't really start the sim until I think around frame 75. You'll see that cloth is going to kick on, and it starts to drop down. Now notice the look and feel of that cloth. It's got movement right off the bat, and the reason that happens is because the cloth node, or the nucleus node inside of Maya, has the ability to calculate lift. So it looks at the profile shape of the piece of geometry, and it generates lift, just like the wing of an airplane does by that profile shape of the piece of geometry. And that lift is derived from the overall environment that it lives in. So if we do something like modify the environment by changing its air density and put it to 0. Well, if there's 0 air density, it's like the vacuum of space. No lift is going to get calculated, right? It's just going to drop straight down. If we go and we modify that air density, and this is just one way of modifying the look and feel of your cloth, right? Obviously, you could change all the attributes on the cloth, like how does it stretch, how does it bend, how does it flex? Is it leather? Is it silk? Is it concrete? It's a very flexible solver. If we add that air density back up and play this back, obviously, it's going to move around a little more chaotically because that air density is extremely high. So this guy's not even going to drop down. It's just going to kind of flutter around a little bit there. So those are a few of the things that, that Maya does as far as visual effects. Maya's smoke system or fluid system, very, very fast, easy to work with. Maya's cloth solver, again, interactive, visual feedback, high-fidelity viewports. These are all things that Maya excels at. So what we want to do is we want to get back into smoke and look at how I did the kind of polished, finished look of this piece. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to export out some of my cameras and some of my lights and some of the geometry using the FBX file format. FBX is kind of Autodesk's interchange file format, and it allows us to pass data back and forth not only between Maya on the Mac and Maya Smoke on the Mac. It allows us to interchange data back and forth with Mudbox and Motion Builder and going from Maya to 3D Studio Max or Softimage to Maya. It's a great, robust file format for moving data around. And it can also carry deforming information. So like this cloth solve, if I wanted that to come into Smoke on the Mac, I could cache it out and bring that in through the FBX file format. So let's go ahead and shut Maya down. We don't need to have that guy up anymore. And we'll jump back into Smoke. And I'm going to kind of walk you through a few of these shots and show you how I built some of these effects up using Maya's render layers and Maya's render passes. So when we're working inside of Maya and we go to do our final renders, what we're going to do is we're going to always render out EXR files. And the reason we're going to do EXR files is they give us a very high dynamic range, or a lot of f-stops included in those files, which really helps us in post, in Smoke. It allows us to kind of really get a great look and feel. So let's go ahead and jump over to the Maya renders one here, and we'll start scrubbing through this guy really quickly. Switch my keyboard and my mouse here. It'll be a little bit easier. All right, so what we've got here is sort of the finished result, right? And I'm going to dive in and sort of dissect how I ended up taking the kind of generic Maya renders and getting to this finished result. So we're in our timeline, and I did all of my compositing using Connectfx on these. So at any time on my timeline, if I double-click on one of these clips, it jumps me into Connectfx. And what Connectfx is Smoke on the Mac's procedural compositing environment. It's super powerful. I'm a Maya artist. Maya works on a dependency graph, meaning nodes with inputs and outputs. Connectfx is the same exact thing. So as a Maya artist, this makes perfect sense to me. I'm totally used to working with nodes with inputs and outputs and building things up in a very kind of modular approach. And this is exactly how we approach compositing inside of Smoke on the Mac. And what it does is it leads you to having unbelievable flexibility, a lot of great control over getting to the end result. So what we're going to do is you can see that wide dynamic range we have inside of those images here. I'll try to my screen's a little bit different than your screen, so I'll try to adjust it to your screen there. So this is basically the passes that we have here. So I didn't really do that many passes. I have a beauty pass for just the legs. I've got the smoke pass. This is sort of the original primary buffer. From that, I extracted this beauty pass. I extracted a matte pass. It's got the smoke coming into it down there on the bottom. And then I've got a motion vector pass, sort of a utility pass that captures that movement in the form of a vector. This is something that renderers can spit out for free. So I could use that to motion blur my objects in post, which is always a great idea because it's nice to be able to dial that in and get the exact result you want. So I take these few little layers and I build it up to that comp. So the first thing that I do is I do a simple color grade. So that was my original coloring that I had on this, and I didn't think that looked that great. We can hide those bends. I don't need to have those anymore. It was a little too saturated for me. So what I did is I got this color correct node, amazing color correct tool, super, super flexible, and piped into that, I've got the mask file of just the legs. So we're piping into that guy, that mask file, and I just desaturated it. So you can see the effect of how it's isolating where that color correction's happening. Then I took this output, and I needed to get it onto a background color, right? So I have a simple color, and I'm doing a very, very basic blend or an over based on that alpha channel. So we kind of layer those two guys on top of each other, pretty straightforward. So the next thing I want to do is I want to get a glow kind of kicking off of these highlights. So there's lots of different ways of doing glows inside of Smoke on Mac, and I figured I'd show you one example of how I built this guy up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just, we're going to jump over to a full up. Actually, we'll stay in this view here. We'll leave our bend down there in the bottom. I want to build up this glow effect really, really quickly. So we'll just start dragging out some nodes to work with. If you hit the G key, it's going to highlight or isolate the selection or the view of what's displayed in your bends here. And these are all the procedural nodes I can use to start building this up. If I just drop that in my list here and double click on the glow, we'll switch it from screen to add, pretty straightforward. So I get this glow that's sort of everywhere. I could spend all day demoing you the glow node. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to show you a couple cool things you can do with it, right? So we'll kind of crank that stuff down. I want to isolate the effect of where that glow is. So to do that, I'm going to use a few more nodes, and you'll get the sense of this procedural progression that we use to get to the end result and the flexibility that that gives you. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and just get back to my back in here, and we'll grab a few more nodes to begin working with. So I'm going to pull out a couple that I've saved. You can save presets of any of these nodes just by dragging them, dropping them down here in the bottom. We're going to grab one called Highlight, and I'll grab this other glow node because we'll want to do a switch between those two. So what we've got is we've got this glow, and I want to isolate the effect of just those edges. So we're going to use this matte edge to do that. And what matte edge does is it's like a really sophisticated luminance key. It works great with high dynamic range. So not only does it pull a luminance key, but it also allows me to shrink or erode that. So I'm using that, and we can blur it and smooth it and do all kinds of kind of filtering operations on top of that key to isolate just the regions that are hot. So that basically, because it's a matte, it goes back down into a range of 0 to 1, right? You remember we talked about working with EXR files in high dynamic range. We want that high dynamic range because the glows will react with values that go over a value of 1. So will the blurs. So we want to get that information back in, and that's really simple to do, right? All we have to do is jump back in here. We'll grab another logic op. So logic op sort of it's just, when you're dealing with CG passes, you're doing lots of adds, lots of overs, lots of multiplies, lots of divides. The logic op's just a simple way of doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the logic op, we're going to take that 0 to 1 result of the matte edge that finds the hot spot and multiply it back in with our original image. So this is set up to do a blend by default or an add by default. We'll put that to be multiply. And now you can see that we're getting back to that sort of hot spot on that knee by multiplying in that range back on top of that 0 to 1. So now if we take this and we throw this into this glow right here, you can see that I grabbed the alpha channel. We don't want that. You can see that the effect is a good bit different where that glow is. Now I'm going to wire this one up here. We'll just take this guy because this glow's got a little bit better settings. I like those settings a little bit better. And we're going to simply drop that on top of our original image. So we'll just put that into a blend comp. So the blend comp is similar to the logic op in the ability to kind of set what type of blending operations do you want to do between your images, but it has a lot more control. So it has color correction controls kind of built into it. So this just builds on top of that and gives you more flexibility in one sort of super blend comp node. So we're just sort of adding those guys back on, and it looks really, really cool. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to add in that kind of lens flare glow effect. And when we're doing lighting effects inside of Smoke on the Mac, we're actually doing them in a full 3D environment called Action. So let's go ahead and jump into Action really quickly here. We'll pull up an Action node. We'll just go here and hit A to get to the Action node. So what Action, and again, is this 3D environment. So we want to take some images into this 3D environment. Let's grab we'll grab our blend, our output result of this guy, and we're just going to put that into the background of Action, right? So we'll jump into Action really quickly, and we'll start adding in some cool stuff here. This is you guys are going to love this. So inside of Action, let's tone map that guy back down a little bit. Adjust the exposure and contrast to something that looks kind of cool. So inside of Action, we've got a camera, and I want to add a light. So all I have to do is come over here and just hit Light, isolate that out, drag and drop my light inside of there. On that light, I want to have something like a lens flare. So if we jump over to our relighting tools, they're all, again, built up procedurally. So the lens flare is going to be made up of a bunch of other little nodes that live inside of this relighting tool. And you can drag and drop and use those lens flares and those sort of glints and glistens and glares as texture maps on geometry using the blooming node. So it's again, really, really flexible. So if we take our light, and on top of that light, we're going to just simply add in this little lens flare. We'll drag that out. You can see, just like that, we now have our light in our scene. We've got this kind of cool lens flare. Now, I want that light to pass behind that leg, right? If I pull that guy behind that leg, I want it to go behind there. So we're going to bring in another layer. Right now, we just have a simple layer floating on the background of the camera. We're going to jump back out and kind of pipe in some more information into this guy. So if we go back into our batch mode here, or our Connectfx mode, and we add in a new input for this guy, what we're going to do is we're going to grab that same layer, right, the same blend comp layer. We'll put that into the input, and then we'll grab the alpha channel from this guy. So now if we go back into Action, we'll go up into our 2-up mode here. We'll go back into Action. We've now got this axis, right? So what happens is this light now has the ability to interact with that piece of geometry, right? It's going to be lighting that piece of geometry. I want that light to be behind that object. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab the light, and we're going to just push that light back in Z. And you can see as soon as it gets behind that piece of geometry, it's no longer affecting it. But if I do something like that, that lens flare interacts with it exactly the way I'd want. So we're going to add another light into our scene really quickly, just to kind of front fill those other objects right there. We can go ahead and we can double click on this second light that we added and just making it ambient light as opposed to a spotlight. So it will really fill that kind of that scene back in for us. And I could pull this guy back in Z this way so it's kind of hitting a lot of stuff and use that to brighten it up a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to crank the intensity of this light, get that lens flare looking a little bit hotter. And we're going to bring in one last thing, which is our logo, which is an FBX file. So we'll go ahead and jump into our Action bin. We're going to import in our FBX file. So we'll just do a file import. We'll make sure our scale is set to 1. We'll grab this Euro FBX file. So now we've got our text inside of our scene here. We can use this guy to scale it up really quickly. So here's our text. We sort of line that text up and over here. It gets interacting with that light. And I just set a simple keyframe on this light, right? So if we go, I think it's this light right here. If we go to this guy, I'm going to crank that intensity up a little bit more. So I just shift, kind of K-click on my X position here, move forward in time. My character kind of walks across, grab that light somewhere like that. K-click on that guy, so we just get this little animated light effect happening. And that's essentially how I got to that first frame. Now, it had a little more polish than this. I did do it in a demo. I spent some time finessing it, but that was the overall effect. So we're going to jump out and look at one more example of using Action really quickly. We're going to go back to our timeline. We're going to go up into the second clip, double-click on that guy to load it into Connectfx. And let's just pull that exposure down a little bit and drop that contrast down. So this example, what we want to do is just look at how we've got a simple camera move that's basically driving this guy. So if you look at the movement of this, and all that blur is happening from these really cool motion vectors, we've got the original image, right? We've got the motion analysis tool. Oops, I got to go F4 to view my result here as I'm clicking through these guys. So this is the original image. This is a motion analysis tool that goes through and figures out how are those pixels moving in space. We're piping those guys into a motion blur node. So I didn't actually use the forward vectors captured out by the renderer. I just used the automatic analysis tool to do that, which is really great because that means you can use this on your own footage, right? Like if you're doing a cut or an edit and you've got something that's super blurry that cuts to another thing that's moving fast, but the motion blur doesn't match, you can use this tool to kind of get those guys to kind of cut together properly and have the same look and feel. So if we just look at this really quickly in this action node, it's really similar to what we were doing before, except we've got a camera kind of included in this one. So we've got this Maya camera that picks up the movement for us automatically, and we had this light that also came in from Maya, and that basically just goes through and takes care of matching all that stuff up for me. So I'm sort of running out of time here. I don't want to run over, but essentially that's what I did to get to the end result. So we'll jump back to our timeline. We can play this back one more time. So that's an example of how we used Maya on the Mac as well as Smoke on the Mac to take some assets off of Turbo Squid, some motion capture moves, use Maya's amazing character retargeting tools, the really cool fluid effects system to generate this look and feel, and add all the final kind of edits and polish inside of Smoke on the Mac. So thanks for your time, everybody, and hanging out at the Autodesk booth at NAB.
Thanks a lot, Daryl.